Hello and welcome to Corruption Chronicles, stories of communities that have encountered corruption and how everyday people have turned it around. I am so excited today to have Mary Elaine Petrucci with me because she has a story of women, her ancestors, who stood up to corruption against a horrific massacre. But first, a little bit about who Mary Elaine Petrucci is today. She's a healthcare expert who has nearly 20 years of healthcare, pharmaceutical sales, and marketing experience with neurorehabilitation, hospitals, and home health company, as well as 20 years as a healthcare provider working with children and adults in schools, home care, hospitals, nursing homes, memory care settings, and independent and assisted living facilities. Mary Elaine has a master's in business administration in healthcare management from Boston University and a master board designation in neurolinguistic programming, timeline therapy, create your future, and hypnosis. She's an institute trainer in both neurolinguistic programming and hypnosis in 42 countries. Mary Elaine blends her speech pathology background to create life-changing transformation and healing for stressed and overwhelmed healthcare professionals, coaches, family caregivers, and holistic practitioners. And she leads highly successful and motivated entrepreneurs and healthcare professionals into confidence, authenticity, and empowerment. Welcome to the show, Mary Elaine. I'd like to start with who you are, who your forebears are, what happened to your family and neighbors decades ago, what they did about it, and then the impact it's had on you, how it's changed you.
Thank you very much. My parents took my brother and I down to Ludlow, Colorado when I was 9, and I really learned the history of the Petrucci family at that point. And I was just so, blown away by their story and what my father's family history was, that I've always wanted to find a way to have a family foundation or legacy, do something in order to really propel what my grandparents went through to the forefront right now. And I was able to do that last year when I was contacted by the founder of a theater troupe. The specialty of the troupe is to do social justice issues. Last year, they were putting on skits on different labor issues around the state. So we were talking about the Denver International Airport strike, the Denver Public Library strike, the Cisco strike here in Colorado. We were talking about other situations. There was a grow house where the employees wanted to form a union because of the conditions that they were expected to work in. I was able to play my grandmother in this part of the theater production, and it was just incredible.
Wow. Do you look like your grandmother?
No, I don't. I wish I did.
How amazing to play her. Sometimes it's uncanny how much we look like our ancestors. I see old photos of my great-grandmother, and it could almost be me. And my ex-husband, we saw a photograph of his grandfather. And when my son was 2, I pointed to the photograph and said, "Johnny, who is that?" And he said, "Well, that's Daddy." And so, yeah. So that's why I was asking if you had that connection also. Let's hear the rest of the story.
The story really started down in the coal fields in southern Colorado. Mother Jones and Ken Lawson came back to Colorado to help the miners in southern Colorado organize a strike. During that time, all of the tension that was being created down in the Ludlow area, the coal operators at the time were probably communicating with John D. Rockefeller, the governor of Colorado, and they were becoming frustrated that the miners had these conditions that they wanted Rockefeller to really address. So, for example, there was an 8-hour work day. So they were working beyond that. And then they were only paid once they were able to extract the coal ore from the mine. So if they had to set up timbers or they had to set off explosions, that wasn't considered part of their workday. They wanted to be paid with money and not in company script, where they could only go to the company store to purchase.
When was this again?
1913.
Okay, so we're looking at 110 years ago.
Yes.
Okay, so conditions were grim then anyway.
Well, they were, and a lot of immigrants came and were working in the mine, and they felt that they came here for the American dream. And I think Rockefeller was following Redford's plan in terms of if the mine owner or an owner of a company was able to provide everything for their workers, that should create a type of utopia. So they had given the miners, I guess, like the company store, access to different, I guess, recreational activities and things. And the miners were just really compelled to strike because they felt like they weren't being treated fairly. So
the only pay they got was company script. They didn't get money that they could use anywhere else in the state or the community or the country. They were only able, well, they were slaves almost, in a sense. They were completely controlled then. There was no way out.
No, and I think, like I said, they were mostly all immigrants, and it was my understanding that there were like 32 languages and or dialects spoken down in that area. Everybody seemed to have an interpreter so that they understood what was happening at like the union meetings that they were holding. So Mother Jones and Ken Lawson came in to help see if they could. This was like the second attempt to come in and unionize down in that area. All this tension was occurring. So the governor sent in the Brink security. He sent in the Colorado militia without declaring martial law. I'm not sure who did this, but they put a machine gun on a railroad car and would move it up and down the tracks and spray it into the tent colony. So what happened was,
tent colony, they lived in tents?
Well, they were moved from company housing into a tent colony in the fall of 1913. My grandparents' oldest son became sick at the end of February, beginning of March.
Can I stop you for a second? Why were they moved into a tent?
I'm not sure. I'm assuming it was a type of punishment for them striking, because I think Rockefeller and Mackenzie King of Canada felt like, they were giving miners everything. They couldn't understand why they were striking and asking for fair wages and to, paid in money so they could go anywhere they chose. So I think that's partly it.
So Rockefeller was the mine owner, is that right? Okay.
Yes.
Wow. And so there was a big movement, I guess, at that time where you had huge autocratic corporations, really, that pretty much controlled everything. And even from in the US and Canada, I'm going to say they were in cahoots. The head honchos were all across country borders. They all shared they shared similar views.
I think that that's the case. I think, I feel like Rockefeller felt, I don't know, betrayed from the miners because they were unionizing, because he felt like he had given them everything to create this utopia that Redford had devised. And also that misinformation was given from the coal operators to like the governor and Rockefeller, and that just really compounded the situation. However, they were moved into this tent colony and they lived in it during one of the coldest winters on record in Colorado. My grandparents' oldest son became sick at the end of February, beginning of March, and my grandmother was denied access to take a train 14 miles to get medical care, and that child passed away. And then a month and a half later, the day after Greek Easter on April 20th, 1914, some mining officials came in to ask for a specific miner that everybody in Ludlow knew never lived down in that area. And so we don't know who fired the first shot, but there was fighting that occurred. Some men, women, and children were escaping through an arroyo up into the San Juan Mountains. My grandmother and her remaining 3 children and some other women and children went into a birthing pit. And at the very end of this conflagration, they set the Colorado militia set the tent colony on fire. And my grandmother and another woman were the only 2 that walked out of that pit alive. There were miners who had survived. However, it was some of the men, women, and children who were caught in like the crossfire, and then the women and children that were in this pit.
So they were the only survivors of the tent colony who'd gone into the pit, and it was set on fire and they escaped, but they were the only 2 of many, many. And so there were other survivors who could tell the story, but they had escaped elsewhere.
Possibly. I think.
What happened to the people who went up into the arroyo?
I really don't know what happened to them.
But it was the dead of winter in Colorado.
Like I said, it was one of the coldest winters on record in Colorado, and for them to be out in a tent colony.
And then for the tent colony to be destroyed.
Yes.
And they weren't allowed to stay in the housing that was there. They'd been moved to the tents. Oh, and that was all done. The governor called out the militia. That was all done really at the behest of the governor. Wow.
And he did. And I mean, there was no declaration of martial law. Yeah. So they were sent down illegally.
So she had 3 children and a husband. One had died weeks earlier.
My grandparents had 4 children. They lost one when they were unable to go for medical care. And then the remaining 3 children perished in the pit.
Oh, no. Oh.
Grandmother and another woman.
Okay.
Elderita Pedregon that survived. Apparently, when the militia came in to burn the tent colony, they moved a mattress over the top of the pit, because my grandmother remembers that it wasn't there, that the miners and the women didn't put the mattress on top of the pit.
So she lost everybody. She lost everything. And all that was left was one other woman with her. And did she say, did you hear how did they manage to survive? It's too horrific.
That's a miracle. It really is.
Yeah.
Because the other women and children passed away because of the smoke inhalation. They were, I'm sure, burned. So I don't know how my this other Elderita survived. My grandmother then went with Mother Jones and 2 other women from Ludlow and a lawyer from Denver. They went on a speaking tour to Chicago, New York, and Washington, D.C. So I do have my grandmother's record of her testimony before the Senate, before Congress. So that was really amazing. And she actually had her last interview with a reporter, and she said that the miners were better off after the strike. And that has been so astounding to me that she had the wherewithal, to go on this speaking tour, and then to say that they were better off after the strike, because that said to me that the miners knew exactly what they were getting into. And because they wanted a better life, because that's the reason why they came to the U.S., that they were willing to stand up for what they wanted, and they knew the consequence. So it was really amazing.
Although much of the community was wiped out, those who continued to work at the mine were better off. Yes,
because they were standing up to the working conditions and how they were being treated. And they had 7 demands that Mother Jones and Ken Lawson were helping the miners articulate to the coal operators as well as to Rockefeller. So I think I'm sure Mother Jones and Ken Lawson had been in other strike fields, like in the South, like in Virginia. So I think, in fact, Mother Jones did call off a strike in Virginia because she knew that the opposition was there were too many of the opposition for them to continue the strike. So they stopped. Mother Jones and Ken Lawson presented it to the miners. Like I had said earlier, there was many languages and dialects spoken. I think the miners knew what the consequences might be. I mean, they were experiencing it with like that machine gun being, spraying into the tent colony, as well as the coal operators could see like the tension really building. And they continued. And so I admire that they stood up to like the governor and to Feller and said, this is not okay.
No. Well, my gosh, that's incredible. And you said that her kids died, but she's your grandmother. So somebody had to survive or you wouldn't be here. Isn't that, did a child survive?
That's a great question. No, my grandparents named the next 3 children after the 3 children that died in the massacre.
So your grandfather survived?
Yes, my father was named after the 6 3/4-year-old infant.
Wow. Wow. That's just, and where did they go? Did they go back to work in Ludlow again?
Yes, they went back to Ludlow and other mines in southern Colorado. Some of my grandfather's relatives lived in Joliet, and they encouraged him to bring his family to Joliet. And that is where I guess my father's youngest sister was born, but everybody was born in and around Ludlow.
Wow. So here you're 9 years old and you and your brother get taken down there. I suppose you probably hadn't heard too much of the history before that. I'm really glad that they told you that history, because my grandparents it was a different situation, but they were in Kansas City in the 20s and 30s, formed a new political party. And they were staunch Republican. But, at that time, a lot of the Republicans were progressives, cared about human rights and healthcare and those things. And they formed a separate party to oust the bad Democrats at the time, and put in a good Democrat mayor. So it was interesting, but they completely, all of them stepped aside from all their party politics. And I guess the reason I bring that up is because it's not a legacy I knew about. They never told me. And I didn't find out until 3 weeks before my mother died. And she started to tell me the story. And I said, Mom, here you've been listening to me for all these years complain about the corrupt Democrats. And I'm not saying that because, corruption goes, it's not party political, but that was my situation. About those who were corrupt in my community, and they weren't all Democrats. She'd been listening to my stories by the time she died, at least for probably a couple of years. I said, why didn't you tell me this? And she said, I only just remembered. I was a little girl when it happened. And then I asked her younger sister, who's 5 years younger. She has no recollection of ever hearing about it. So here they were involved in this huge movement that wiped out the corruption in Kansas City, turned it around, and they never taught their children about that legacy. And I think, I'm wondering, was it just too awful and they didn't want their children to have to know about that? And yet here your parents, when you're 9 years old, how old was your brother?
8.
8?
Yes.
What kind of an impact did that have on you? How did that affect your life from there on?
It really did have an impact because I felt, first of all, I was really blessed to be living. My father may never have been around, or he may have been named something differently. And it really made me think about the legacy my grandparents and the miners in Colorado had given me. And my grandmother really never talked about it. She came to visit one year, and I guess my father was an electrician, so he was working at the governor's mansion, and the governor's wife wanted some information about Ludlow because she was very interested in Colorado history, and my grandmother just couldn't really remember. In fact, George McGovern had a publicist, I believe, and he had a layover in Denver and noticed the Petrucci name in Colorado, and he contacted my father, who then gave my grandmother's information, and he sent her like pictures of the tent colony, and she just really couldn't remember it. And I think
Oh,
at
wow.
some point she chose not to think about it anymore. And I can understand why. And I have asked my cousins who live near my grandparents how they heard about it, because I only found out, like I said, when I was 9. And I always wanted to do something to have like that memory and that legacy continue. And when I was able to portray my grandmother during this play last year, it just was really incredible, satisfying, because I was able to bring the story forward again. And I hoped, and I still hope, that no one really forgets it, because it's really the start again of the unions here in Colorado, at least, and elsewhere. There was a Starbucks about 30-40 minutes from where I live, and they were striking. And actually, they were asked to join with another Starbucks, and they chose not to, because that would have, I guess, diluted their protest. So they were able to get a contract. And it was really exciting to see, like, yes, the unions sometimes have, like you've mentioned, have been corrupt. However, it is the unions that made the middle class. And if it hadn't been for unions, we would have had like the elite and the poor. Unions really brought forth the birth of the middle class. And nice to hear that there are other places like at Amazon and other big corporations that have stood up to management and have won the fight. Not always. However, it's bringing to attention that those same working conditions aren't always the best for the employees. I just really give credit to those people that are standing up and demanding a better environment. When I was playing my grandmother, we had no idea where we were going to first perform the play. The ironic thing is that they chose to have it at the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 68 in Denver. And that was the union my father belonged to for 65 years. And food for that evening was supplied by the United Mine Workers of America. And I was like, okay, it just came like full circle. It was just incredible.
And did the union take good care of your grandfather? Your father, did you feel that they took care of him?
Yes, definitely. I mean, he belonged to it, like I said, for 65 years, and was really proud that he belonged to a union and could create a better life for our family. So definitely.
Oh, I'm speechless. It's quite a story. I had heard about the massacre. Somebody took this up and took it bigger.
During the 100th anniversary of the Ludlow Massacre, they had a film crew in the area, and there is a production company here in Denver that wanted to portray different historical events in Colorado. So they did one on the Sand Creek Massacre. They had asked, like my father, my cousin, and I, to be part of this film on Ludlow. From what I understood, they were still waiting for funding in order to bring it out into the public. So I'm not sure where it stands at this point. So yes, a film has been produced. I felt really honored to be part of that. And I think it was the first time, because I kept asking my father, doesn't it feel weird to you that you were named after a sibling that passed away? And he seemed to always brush it away. And it wasn't until like 2014 that he would admit that he wanted to give voice to the children at Ludlow. Yeah.
So 100 years later, he gave voice to his deceased sibling, for whom Petrucci is an Italian name. Is that right? What kind of immigrants? Where did your family immigrate from?
My grandfather came from Caserta, outside of Naples. My grandmother was born here in the States, and they met in southern Colorado.
And were they both Italian?
Yes.
And so were your mother, your grandmother's family, were they fairly recent immigrants also?
I think they came here earlier, but they had settled in, I guess, in the area around Ludlow in Hastings.
And so they were Roman Catholic, and that I would have thought would have influenced, I don't know, some of the culture and some of the ways in which I know if you're Jewish, you never name someone after the dead.
Right.
I know that I've seen that happen when I go through my family ancestry. I see that it looks like sometimes people are named after deceased children from just looking. I don't know for a fact. I just know when I look at the children and who's died and who's next, and it seems like that does happen.
It does. It really caused some confusion.
Yes.
At one point, I'm not sure, I can't recall the specific situation, but we were all looking for birth certificates. And initially they were sending us records of, Dad's siblings who had passed. So it was just trying to figure out.
So they weren't entirely unrecorded. The
No.
governor was not a nice man. I'm going to say that.
Okay.
And but there were aspects of the government where you had a name, you had a presence, you were there. I think I'm just willing to end on this note because I'm just flabbergasted and speechless, and I do hope that more comes out about it. I would, though, like to give you an opportunity, if there's anything else you'd like to say about this, to come forward with it. And then also, of course, I'd love to hear just a little bit more about how people can reach you if they come across this and want to talk with you about it, or if they'd like to work with you in your professional capacity also.
I just want people to understand and really give voice and recognition to the miners down in Southern Colorado. People don't realize that they have a standard of living that they would never have had if it hadn't been for people like down at Ludlow, the miners down at Ludlow, or my grandparent, to stand up for better working conditions. If it hadn't been for my grandparents and other strike situations around the country, we wouldn't be where we are right now. And I think, yes, some of the unions had gone through some corrupt times. However, it is really the unions who have stood up and made living work conditions so much better. And if it hadn't been, we wouldn't have had a middle class. We wouldn't be where we are right now. I just think people need to stop and realize that this resurgence of people striking for better work conditions is something to applaud. I mean, I give my grandparents and the miners in Southern Colorado so much gratitude for standing up to the governor and to Rockefeller and the Brink Security and the Colorado militia. I mean, it must have been horrific for them to live in that situation, and yet they knew that they had rights and they wanted to voice that and they wanted to be heard. And that's really my goal for participating in the theater troupe last year, and what I would continue to rally again for, from now on, because I think unions do make better living situations for individuals. I think people need to stop and realize the cost of why we're here today.
I have a thank you. Yes, I'm thankful to your family as well.
Thank you.
And thankful to you for sharing the story. They deserve that. They deserve to have a voice. So I guess that's a good segue, because now what you work on is voice. Voice and speech and having a voice. So where can people, is there anywhere they can go to find out more about the Ludlow story, but also how do people contact you if they need some help with neurolinguistic programming, or with being stressed out healthcare professional, or the whole variety of things that you help with to be trained? Where do they go for all of
They can get in touch with me several ways. One is my email address, which is Petrucci, Petrucci 2002 @gmail.com, or they can also go to my caregiver lifelineacademy.com, and that will give them the resources for the neurolinguistic programming and the hypnosis that I do.
Well,
so
that's
to help.
that sounds fascinating in and of itself.
I know it's Yes, it's one way for me to help caregivers and other people, burnt out executives, healthcare workers, a voice, and to help them change a lot of their limiting beliefs, strategies that no longer serve them, and to really address some of the values, the way that they work in different types of situations so that they can have a more purpose-filled life. And that's what I hope to bring to other people.
Life.
Yep.
Life.
Life.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mary Elaine. And I can't wait for people to have a chance to see this, and maybe it'll pull some more stories out of the woodwork. There may be other families that there's more.